Hijacking Happiness by Teresa Meyerhofer Christensen. Narrated by Teresa Meyerhofer Christensen. Introduction. In September 2018, I was speaking at a church gathering in Mountain Green, Utah, on the topic of finding joy in the journey. I've spoken on many topics for many years in many buildings, but for some reason this topic touched a chord that I had not anticipated. After the service, several women were waiting to talk to me. Men expressed their gratitude for my words as well, but their comments were more casual and passing. One lovely lady had even scrawled a single-page letter front and back expressing how much my words had meant to her. Her message was quite unexpected and humbling. The last person who thanked me expressed that while I was speaking, she had the impression I should write a book. I informed her that I had indeed written a book, but it was fiction. I had written 4 fictional novels at that time, but I didn't want to sound obnoxious. The woman in front of me interrupted my mistake and interjected, "No, I mean on this topic." Then after a short conversation, she wandered off. I wish I'd gotten her name. She had a warm, attractive face and inspired message for me. My first self-response was, I don't write nonfiction. I have nothing important enough to add to the world's philosophers of wisdom, but the idea would not seem to let me go. Thoughts on what I could share on the topic kept coming to my mind. In spite of all of man's amazing advances and impressive inventions over these recent centuries, I don't think we as a people have ever been less happy. I'm definitely not a sage on the subject. Perhaps I can glean from those who are and feed it back to a world hungry, incredibly hungry for happiness. So in answer to the obvious question, why me? Why not me? Or any one of us on Earth's journey for that matter. I am one of the masses desperately searching for this elusive commodity. In my immediate family circle alone, we have experienced many of the challenges that the rest of the world faces. Illnesses, including cancer multiple times, anorexia nervosa, anxiety, depression, spina bifida, infertility, miscarriages, addiction, dementia, job losses, marital issues, financial issues, and death. While my direct travel plans have not always taken me to my desired destination, I've learned how to hijack another mode of transportation to get me closer to the place we call happiness. Accordingly, this work is a culmination of many sources woven together, with my impressions occasionally interjected on how to perhaps hijack some happiness during our stay on Earth. I've also included a few stories from personal experiences as I've attempted to find joy in my journey here. May we all uncover the real treasures of our existence, those that cannot be stored in a bank, but dug up somewhere far closer to home. Disclaimer: this message is for everyone, but those with clinical depression may need additional medication to achieve their greatest level of happiness here. Chapter 1. Our Town. Many may be familiar with the classic play entitled Our Town. This 1938 meta-theatrical 3-act play was written by American playwright Thornton Wilder and takes place in a fictional Grover's Corner, New Hampshire between 1901 and 1913. It is told through the everyday lives of the town's citizens. Our Town artistically shares the story of a woman named Emily, who dies quite young, giving birth to her second child, and is allowed to return to live just one day on Earth. Her initial joy at being back quickly turns to anguish as she realizes how little people appreciate the simple joys of life. The memory proves too painful to her, and she realizes that every moment of life should be treasured. The show is simple, even slow from today's standards, but elegantly heart-wrenching. The closing lines go like this. From Emily. "O Earth, you are too wonderful for anyone to realize you. Do human beings ever realize life while they live it? Every minute?" And then the stage manager or narrator answers, "No." There's a pause. "Saints and poets, maybe they do some." I believe much of our life depends on how we realize things, or see things from what or whose perspective. Hopefully these chapters can help each of us find the wonderful here on Earth, which Emily, through her newly acquired perspective, could finally see, and that we will not have to lose our life before realizing its worth. Notice the name of the town in the title is not even mentioned, but is left generic. Our town or our location does not really matter. We can be happy anywhere or nowhere, at any time and in most any circumstances. Do we realize that the best destination for happiness may not even be an actual physical place, but lies somewhere deep inside ourselves instead? Maybe that location is the most difficult to find and part of the problem. I did not always embrace this knowledge and have not always been so congenial about moving to a new location. We relocated many times as a young family to help advance my husband's career. I would get settled and make friends in each new place, planning to live there forever, and within a few years, or sometimes less, find out it was time to move again. I remember on one occasion my husband had already moved on to a new job in a new state, leaving me and our 4 young daughters behind. He planned to find a home for us while I wrapped up our previous lives. I was dragging my feet, not sure I really wanted to go this time and make yet another move. Far past the appropriate time to do so, I finally expressed my feelings to my spouse one night during a long-distance phone call. He was surprised and suggested I pray about it and see how I felt afterward. When I hung up the old landline telephone, I begrudgingly dropped to my knees and turned my thoughts and heart to a higher power and source of inspiration. Then I rose and opened the scripture, seeking an answer. The section I read that night happened to be all about moving to a new place and the treasures that would be found there. Humbled and without complaint, I moved on once again. The treasures we found there in the new community may not have been financial, but we developed friendships in that new area which we still have to this day. True treasures were found that I may have missed if I had continued to believe that I could only be happy in the one spot where I was living and had not been willing to look for happiness in a different location. Our youngest son, along with his princess wife, currently leads his life as a pretend prince and performer at Disney World, notably dubbed the happiest place on earth. His motto has always been, make wherever you are where you want to be. I believe that each of us can decide to enjoy wherever we currently are along life's journey, whether in a hut, hovel, or palace, and the palace may not be the easiest place to find it. I recognize that some people struggle with SAD, SAD, seasonal defect disorder, and that the amount of light that they receive from their surroundings can affect their mood. But I'm speaking more metaphorically here. More light can be achieved in various ways wherever we dwell. Many people move or change jobs or partners searching for that elusive happiness that they are sure will be found in the next place or next person, when our search for true contentment and joy likely needs to begin somewhere much closer to home. We have all seen people who appear to have no obvious reason to be happy but are, and those who have every reason to be happy but are not. I recently returned from a trip to India, a land of colors, sights, smells, flavors, and millions of people. They had so little of the world's measurable worth anywhere I looked, but they appeared to be so open, happy, and approachably friendly. I saw children living on the side of roads and highways selling whatever they could, begging for money with huge smiles on their faces and warm, welcoming eyes. Our guide even shared with us that only 4 years previously to our journey in November 2018, 86% of the homes in India did not have toilets. Can we even imagine what that would be like? I would guess that most who are reading this not only have a toilet in their homes, but showers and running water as well. I doubt any have to beg on the streets. Yet most all the people whose paths we crossed seemed less distressed by their circumstances than one might think, and many requested to have photos taken with us without worrying about personal appearance or at times the bleak background scenery in the picture. How can that be? Why are they so genuinely happy with seemingly so little to be happy about? I know they're religious or spiritual people. Perhaps they carry a deeper knowledge of who they are, or at least what really matters. In the middle of the gritty poverty stands one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Taj Mahal. This impressive marble structure was built to honor a beloved wife, mother, and daughter who, like Emily in our town, also died in childbirth. The Taj Mahal is sometimes referred to as a poem written in white, or a tear on the cheek of time. Perhaps the people in India have chosen to see and embrace the beauty over the ugly around them. There's a parable called Acres of Diamonds about an African man who looked for treasure everywhere except in his own backyard, where it was ultimately found. The true story goes something like this. There was once a wealthy man named Ali Hafed, who lived not far from the river Indus. He was content because he was wealthy, and wealthy because he was content. One day a priest visited Ali Hafed and told him about diamonds. Ali Hafed heard all about diamonds and their worth, and he went to bed that night a poor man. He had not lost anything, but he was poor because he was discontent, and discontented because he feared he was poor. Ali Hafed sold his farm, left his family, and traveled to Palestine and then to Europe searching for diamonds. He did not find them. His health and his wealth failed him. Dejected, he cast himself into the sea. One day the man who'd purchased Ali Hafed's farm found a curious sparkling stone in a stream that cut through his land. It was a diamond. Digging produced more diamonds, acres of diamonds in fact. This, according to the parable, was a discovery of the actual famed diamonds of Golconda. In the 8 towns, twice as many houses in several states where we have lived, I've noticed that a person pretty much finds whatever they're looking for in each place they abide. There are good things to be found in every location and almost every situation, often in our own backyards. It has also been proven that not only being inside a home at all, but being outside in nature seems to increase one's level of happiness. Hiking or walking outdoors is my chosen option of self-medication. I may not be as adept as the people of India in finding contentment wherever I am, but hopefully I'm better than Ali Hafid. The greatest inspiration of this journey, both written and lived, is to create a home of happiness wherever we happen to be. Happiness does not depend on the country, state, city, town, or rural area in which we live, but as a narrator of our town reminds us, it can be realized here on earth by saints or poets. And I believe a saint or poet dwells somewhere within each of us. Chapter 2. Through Heaven's Eyes. When our 6 children were all much younger and living within the walls of our home, we could rarely afford to go to a movie theater to watch a movie. So one year we decided to make the experience an annual Christmas treat. Every year on either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, we would select a family-friendly film to attend together. In 1998, the recently released movie, The Prince of Egypt, an animated retelling of the classic story of Moses, won top choice. Our children's ages ranged from 18 down to 3 years old that year, so finding a movie of common interest was a challenge. I went to this movie with low expectations and left having received a profoundly moving experience. The soundtrack alone was amazing, and many of the songs touched my heart deeply. One song, All I Ever Wanted, opened my mind to new thoughts about the trajectory my life had taken. While not what I had planned, perhaps it was just what heaven had planned for me. Many of the lyrics and melodies from various other songs were equally inspiring, but the one that I especially want to mention is the title of this chapter, Through Heaven's Eyes. Moses has hastily departed from Egypt at this junction of the story, leaving disgraced after having discovered his true identity and killing a guard in the process. He is living in the desert with a family of girls whose father's name is Jethro. Moses' self-esteem is incredibly low. He feels of no value. At this point, Father Jethro sings a song to Moses to let Moses know that there is much more to him than he realizes. A single thread in a tapestry, though its color brightly shines, can never see its purpose in the pattern of the grand design. And the stone that sits on the very top of the mountain's mighty face doesn't think it's more important than the stones that form the base. So how can you see what your life is worth, or where your value lies? You can never see through the eyes of man. You must look at your life through heaven's eyes. Jethro continues to sing a few more insightful verses, telling Moses that we each have trials, or more poetically, that we are all blown about by the winds of change and chance. And even though we don't know all the steps, we must learn to join the dance. We cannot sit on the sidelines waiting for a tune we feel comfortable with, because a perfect song may never be played on our jukebox of lives. The lyrics end with this advice. So how do you judge what a man is worth? By what he builds or buys? You could never see with your eyes on earth. Look through heaven's eyes. Look at your life. Look at your life through heaven's eyes. I pray regularly to see things from heaven's perspective. The vantage point from that elevated location is decidedly more exalted and clearer than if we focus myopically on only what we can see here from below. Each of our lives would be much more meaningful if we could see our existence from God's eyes. He has an eternity of wisdom, He knows where we are going, and He wants us to succeed in getting there. In contrast, we as humans are often discouraged and hindered by roadblocks that probably appear tiny from above. There is an analogy about a road winding across a small island in the Pacific that has an utterly ridiculous amount of twists and turns required to navigate it. However, it only seems ridiculous until seen from the highest point on the terrain. From that higher elevation, every bump and twist and turn make total sense. It is far easier to see that the builder was attempting to avoid as he traversed the treacherous terrain. So it is with our lives. Things that may not make sense now one day will, when we arrive at our destination with an expansive view and greater understanding. A person may ask, what can heaven see that we cannot? For we are right here, close up in the thick of things. Perhaps it's sort of like putting on a pair of 3D holiday glasses that I gave my grandchildren to look at our Christmas tree lights last year. The lights had been carefully strung by my husband and added color and brightness to the tree. Through our temporal eyes alone, the tree looked lovely. However, after sliding on the cardstock glasses and viewing it again, the lit tree looked magical. With one pair of glasses, elves suddenly appeared over each light bulb. With another set, angels appeared. There were candy canes, reindeer hidden in the lights, and even the words Feliz Navidad magically appeared when donning one pair. That is how I imagine seeing things through heaven's eyes to be. What we can see with our own eyes may be lovely, but without its assistance, the view becomes magnificent. There is a story about the prophet Elijah in 2 Kings of the Old Testament that's one of my favorites. The king of Syria had sent a legion of soldiers to surround the city with plans to capture or kill Elisha. When Elisha's servant arose the next morning, he saw that a host had encompassed the city with horses and chariots. And in great distress, the young man asked his master what they should do. Elijah answered him, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them." Then Elisha prayed that the Lord would open the young man's eyes, and the veil from the servant's eyes fell away, and he could see an army of support gathered in their behalf. They beheld that the mountain was full of previously unseen horses and chariots of fire. We may not need chariots of fire, but with heavenly vision we can see that we are not alone and can be empowered to conquer our own individual demons. I promise if you look through heaven's eyes towards God's promises, you'll begin to behold all that He has in store for you and hopefully see yourself as He does. Embrace your excellence. Know that you are who you need to be and where you need to be at this time for some reason. This enlightened vision works not only when looking at our own life, but also enhances how we see others as well. If we could see everyone whose path we cross through heaven's lens, not only would our sight be glorious, but we would be assisting others to magnify their own inner potential. We should strive to see each other how Christ does. He didn't hang out with the popular people of His day, but He chose instead to surround Himself with those who were slightly broken. With heavenly 3D glasses, even those whose images may appear slightly dim or dull will have a brilliance you've never imagined. Perhaps the greatest difference in the view through heaven's lens is increased level of love by which we see, and how that love makes everything more beautiful. Can we allow ourselves to see through those glasses that everyone around us is a sacred, valuable being? And can we learn to understand others from this loving perspective and not merely from our own? Joseph Smith once said, "While one portion of the human race is judging and condemning the other without mercy, the greater parent of the universe looks upon the whole human family with a fatherly care and paternal regard. His love is unfathomable." Christ spent His time with those considered outcasts, the least of the least. A Latter-day disciple, Robert C. Gay, said, "I believe Jesus did this so that each of us may always understand that His love is greater than our fears, our wounds, our addictions, our doubts, our temptations, our sins, our broken families, our depression and anxieties, our chronic illness, our poverty, our abuse, our despair, and our loneliness. He wants us to know that there is nothing and no one He is unable to heal and deliver to enduring joy." Recently, I had eye surgery to help me see more clearly through my aging eyes. I went into the operation fearing that I may lose the lesser vision I already had, but trusted in the surgeon's skills. Now, all that I see out of my corrected eyes is much more defined and pleasing. I do not actually see through my healer's eyes, but was able to by the work of His hands. Maybe we could all use a little eye surgery, performed by the hands of an exalted surgeon who never makes mistakes. He can make our vision unimaginably glorious. Let us let go of our fear and let happiness into our view. Like Moses, we can then see things through heaven's eyes, with His enhanced vision. Chapter 3. All these things shall give thee experience. When expecting my third child at only 24 years old, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. During this scary time, I was given a book called All These Things Shall Give Thee Experience by Neil A. Maxwell. I'm embarrassed to admit at the time I didn't read it. Not only was I extremely overwhelmed, but for some immature reason, I felt slightly offended that the giver must not understand what I was going through. Since that unenlightened moment, I've read the book several times and gleaned more with each reading. There are many powerful parts that I could share, but one of my favorites is a quote by Malcolm Muggeridge. He was a religious writer during the 1900s who was converted to Christianity after a trip to India to write about Mother Teresa. His book, Something Beautiful for God, introduced Mother Teresa to the Western world. But back to the book, All These Things Shall Give Thee Experience. In it, Mr. Muggeridge is quoted to say that without trials or impasses that our Heavenly Father sends us along our journey, our experience here on earth would be of no more worth than a night in a cheap hotel. Malcolm Muggeridge shares, "I feel so strongly in the end of my life that nothing can happen to us in any circumstance that is not part of God's purpose for us. Therefore, we have nothing to fear, nothing to worry about, except that we should rebel against His purpose. Nothing that happens in this world need shake that feeling. All the happenings in this world, including the most terrible disasters and suffering, will be seen in eternity as in some mysterious way a blessing, as part of God's love. We ourselves are part of that love. We belong to that scene, and only so far as we belong to that scene does our existence here have any reality or worth. Otherwise, our mortal existence is, as St. Teresa of Avila said, no more than a night in a second-class hotel. I find that thought quite profound. Each of us will be given trials we cannot outrun them. This is the plan to help us become the people our Father knows we can be. He already knows our potential. We just have to prove it to ourselves. If we are not on earth to learn and be tested, what would be the reason to come to earth? A vacation from paradise? Our challenge is to not lament what happens to us while here, but to focus on how to deal with it well. When faced with difficulties, instead of saying, "Why me?" I've tried to ask, "What am I supposed to learn from this?" And then quickly add, "And please help me learn whatever I need to rapidly so I can get through this rough patch as swiftly as possible." I'm obviously not yet able to completely be grateful for all the trials that have been sent my way, but I'm still working on it. Most of us have likely noticed that the happiest people on earth are not always those who have perfect, trouble-free lives. People living in some of the poorest third-world countries often appear to be happier than those dwelling in the wealthiest nations. There is such a thing as the World Happiness Report. It is based on measurable things like the GDP per capita, social support, life expectancy, freedom to make life's choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption or dystopia. In 2018, the top 20 countries were ranked 1. Finland, 2. Norway, 3. Denmark, 4. Iceland, 5. Switzerland, 6. Netherlands, 7. Canada, 8. New Zealand, 9. Sweden, 10. Australia, 11. Israel, 12. Austria, 13. Costa Rica, 14. Ireland, 15. Germany, 16. Belgium, 17. Luxembourg, 18. United States, 19. the United Kingdom, and 20. the United Arab Emirates. Then the top 20 countries that increased their level of happiness the most over the last 10 years were 1. Togo, 2. Latvia, 3. Bulgaria, 4. Sierra Leone, 5. Serbia, 6. Macedonia, 7. Uzbekistan, 8. Morocco, 9. Hungary, 10. Romania, 11. Nicaragua, 12. Congo, 13. Malaysia, 14. Philippines, 15. Tajikistan, 16. Malta, 17. Azerbaijan, 18. Lithuania, 19. Iceland, and 20. China. Chad, Africa was rated the saddest country in the world. Happiness is a difficult thing to measure. These figures are just an average derived from a formula with predetermined areas to evaluate. A different list of factors would come up with different countries on our happiness location list. Inside each of these selected countries, their individual population's level of happiness will also vary from person to person. In another study based on different data points to determine happiness, which I read a few years ago, the United States was way down on the list at number 105. The top 10 countries were mainly third world countries. What does that tell us? Not only do different things create happiness for different people of the world, but financial security does not always buy happiness. It would be interesting to have a happy-o-meter that would measure a person's level of happiness, contentment, and joy, if they merely looked into it or blew into it like a DUI breathalyzer test. Happiness is subjective. If a person is waiting for a worry-free life with no difficulties to face before they can be happy, they may be waiting a very long time, or forever. The things that happen around us do not need to determine our happiness, they just redefine it. When we were a young married couple and our expectations were far too high on what we hoped life would bring, I had this quote by Gordon B. Hinckley burned into a plaque of wood for my husband's office. Anyone who imagines that bliss is normal is going to waste a lot of time running around shouting that he's been robbed. The fact is that most putts don't drop, most beef is tough, most children grow up to be just people, most successful marriages require a high degree of mutual toleration, most jobs are more dull than otherwise. Life is like an old-time rail journey. Delays, sidetracks, smoke, dust, cinders, jolts, interspersed only occasionally by beautiful vistas and thrilling bursts of speed. The trick is to thank the Lord for letting you have the ride. So, How do we learn the trick? Is it possible? How do we grow enough that we can appreciate life each and every day and all the things that come our way? The mindset definitely comes easier for some than others, and it's beautiful to behold when it's achieved. I wish I had a magical formula for you. However, unless this ability is our spiritual gift, we may need to work every day to develop that talent. It has been determined that a person can become an expert in any endeavor they spend 10,000 hours working on. Do the math. That means if we focus on appreciating and accepting where we are currently going for 30 minutes a day, in 54 years we'll have achieved mastery of the skill. Or in simpler terms, we'll need to work our whole lives to earn this mindset. Perhaps the best place to start is where this chapter started. Remember that all these things that we're going through shall give us experience and add excitement to the journey here. Our challenges can be seen as adventures to help us get to where we need to be, not merely misery poured out upon us for the entertainment of an unseen deity. The bottom line is that our happiness does not depend on what is happening around us. Happiness is not something we earn. It is something we are or can become. Chapter 4. Ridding ourselves of regret. One of the biggest roadblocks to finding joy along our journey is tripping over our regrets. We don't want to have an Emily in our town experience, not really living while we have the chance, but hopefully we will maximize every moment of our experience here. When researching this topic, I came upon an online site where people can anonymously leave their regrets of the day. The gentleman who started this website has made a huge business out of it with books and college tour appearances, so obviously there's a need. The postings are added upon each day by various regret-filled souls and are as extremely diverse as the individuals who write them. Many of the comments that I read were hauntingly sad. Perhaps this simple act of expressing them assists those who share their regrets to let them go. We do need to figure out how to leave our regrets behind and focus on living. This website does perform a service. There has to be a better way. The following comments are just some of the few regrets that I read there. I regret taking all the drugs I've taken because now I have bad anxiety and bipolar depression. I regret hurting the people I've hurt by playing with their emotions. I regret not trying to trust people that probably would be my really good friends right now. I regret being popular because everyone is fake in the popular circle. I regret having lived long enough to see my parents have a disappointment in the person I've become, but still love me unconditionally. I regret not being able to protect my siblings from witnessing my mom's bad relationships. My biggest regret is giving up my dog. I raised him from the time he was 3 months old. I gave him up 8 years later. The only family he's ever known gave him up. I regret this decision for the rest of my life. I had a crush on my friend for years, but I would never tell him because I was scared it would ruin our friendship. He died before I had the chance. I regret not telling him sooner. It kills me because I'll never know his response. My biggest regret is letting my body image control my life. I regret my behavior towards people. I'm never cutting my hair again. I've never regretted anything more. I will forever regret not actually leaving when I found out I was pregnant. Now I know why the world is full of people who only pretend to care when they really truly don't. It's the only way to achieve happiness, I guess. I regret my last suicide attempt and that my kids were the ones who found me. I regret not being the mom I know I could have been. I regret not being there to protect them more and nurture them so they would have confidence to go through life successfully without doubt. I regret not listening to my mom. If only I would have listened and stayed living with her instead of moving in with my dad, my life would be so different. I would be a nurse like she wanted, have a high school diploma instead of a GED, went to a real college instead of an online one, only married once instead of 4, only had 2 children instead of 5. Things would have been so much easier. No PTSD, no depression, no anxiety. If I had only listened to my mom. What would you write on this page if you could let one regret go? We have all experienced regret at one time or another, but we cannot let it cripple us or give the regret more power over the outcome of our life than it deserves. I love the quote from the animated movie Kung Fu Panda. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift. That is why it's called the present. To be our happiest, we need to learn to let go of the past and live more fully in the present. I don't mean we have to forget the past. It made us who we are, but bury the pains of the past so their burden does not crush us with a weight that makes it difficult to move forward. The ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu shared a similar insight. He taught, if you are depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you are at peace, you're living in the present. I've read many articles with varied advice on how to achieve overcoming regret, and while most have some good thoughts, not all ring true to me. After pondering how I have worked to let things go that I no longer want to carry, below are a few of the main solutions that I have found to help move past regret. One item that's not on the list, that is definitely part of the process, is time. Regrets are not made invisible or wiped out instantly. The old saying that time heals all wounds has some truth. My first suggestion would be to live within the boundaries of your own belief system or core values. Our souls become conflicted when we act outside of what we feel to be true. Most regrets could be prevented if we make this parameter part of our decision-making process. There are times when we may slip up, or when we realize our boundaries had not yet been defined, or maybe they've shifted. Regrets will be inevitable, but they can be vastly reduced if we operate from this perspective. Don't cross the line that keeps you comfortable in your own skin. A story has stuck with me since my youth that outlines this principle of not denying who we are. Many years ago, the son of King Louis XVI of France had been taken from his throne and imprisoned. His young son, the prince, was taken by those who'd throned the king. They thought that inasmuch as the king's son was heir to the throne, if they could destroy him morally, he would never realize the great and grand destiny that life had bestowed upon him. They took him to a community far away, and there they exposed the boy to every filthy and vile thing that life could offer. They exposed him to foods, the richness of which would quickly make him a slave to appetite. They used vile language around him constantly. They exposed him to lewd and lusting women. They exposed him to dishonor and distrust. He was surrounded 24 hours a day by everything that could drag a soul of a man as low as one could slip. For over 6 months he had this treatment, but not once did the young man buckle under pressure. Finally, after intense temptation, they questioned him. Why had he not submitted himself to these things? Why had he not partaken? These things would provide pleasure, satisfy his lusts, and were desirable. They were all his. The boy said, "I could not do what you ask, for I was born to be a king." We are all born to be a king or queen of our own realm and must live accordingly to keep inner peace. Secondly, realize everyone makes mistakes. A person is often doing the best they can at the time of an error in judgment. Some people hold themselves to such a high standard that they are nearly impossible to measure up to. Remember, we are all human and are here to learn what we need to learn. Let's let our mistakes be stepping stones to help us to higher levels of understanding and not stumbling blocks to prevent our progress. We are often our own worst judge and critic. Third, after making right those things we can, forgive ourselves and don't dwell on or continually revisit our mistakes. The adversary wants us to stay discouraged and to wallow in despair. For a short period of time, we can allow ourselves to suffer, but then we need to get up, dust ourselves off, and move forward. Beating ourselves up or whipping ourselves with mental lashes serves no worthwhile purpose. Restitution can be therapeutic, but self-loathing serves no one. Lastly, go out and do good in the world. Pay it forward. The best way to forget ourselves and move forward is to serve someone else. It may not erase the past, but can act as a salve to remove the sting. Service is an antidote for self-pity and is a win-win for your family, friends, and community. Find someone whose circumstances are worse than your own and be a blessing in their life. Our own lives will be blessed by default. Looking back, which I have suggested is not the optimal thing to do, it seems my main regrets center around the things that I wish I had not done, which adversely affected another's life. An unkind comment or act even decades ago that may have hurt another person in any manner are still etched into my memory. The pain is lessened, but the facts are still vividly there, whereas I seem to have forgotten or been able to let go any of the injustices afflicted by others on myself. Isn't that interesting? For my frame of reference, it seems to be easier to be the one hurt than to be the inflictor of pain. It appears kindness can lessen our regrets, thus increasing our ultimate happiness. One last thought on regret. It seems many people regret the years passing too swiftly. Things they have missed out on or the lack of time they have left. The next 3 chapters will deal specifically in turn with the top 3 deathbed regrets revealed to a nurse who dealt with end-of-life patients. Regrets that we all hope to avoid. But before that, I have a quick question. How old would you be if you did not know the day you were born? My father, who is in his 80s, sent me a country music video posing that question. Sometimes we worry so much about the aging process and the years passing us by that we forget to live the years we do have. Age is in some part an impression of the mind. Some people act much older than their years, and others are more youthful than the number on their birth certificate. It is amazing to me that I, for the most part, feel the same inside as I did at a much younger age, until I glance in the mirror and am reminded of my advancing years. We can remain youthful and happy no matter what our age. So again, how old would you be if you didn't know the day you were born? The song goes on to advise, don't let the old man, or woman, in. Just like happiness, our actual internal age is influenced by what we decide it to be. So since we have some control over it, let's stay young at heart with a spring in our step as long as we're able. Just being alive is something to rejoice about. Chapter 5. I wish I'd spent more time with the people I loved. The regret that I wish I'd spent more time with the people I loved was the number one deathbed regret and the most universal. We often think we have so many other important things to do that we cannot make time to spend with those that should matter most. The people that matter most may evolve and shift during different decades of our life, but we know who they are. When we're young, the relationships with our friends are most important. But as time goes by, those that remain with us through thick and thin are usually members of our family. Anyone we find to love and that loves us in return is a true treasure and worth cherishing. Dieter Uchtdorf, in his talk of regrets and resolutions, said, "We wear our busyness as a badge of honor, as though being busy was a sign of a superior life." I've pondered this comment. Can you imagine Jesus Christ being too busy bustling around in a hurry during his short life among the people of Galilee and Jerusalem? Christ knew he didn't have much time. Do you suppose he multitasked to get a list of urgent things accomplished? I can't see it. He was always present for the one. Relationships mattered most. He taught us that. We all have commitments and stresses in our lives, regardless of our circumstances. They need to be dealt with in the best way we can, but we should never let them get in the way of what is most important. And what is most important almost always involves the people around us. Often we assume that they must know how much we love them, but we should never assume. We should let them know. William Shakespeare wrote, "They do not love that do not show their love." We will never regret kind words spoken or affection shown. Rather, our regrets will come of things we omit from our relationships with those who mean the most to us. Social media has created an illusion in today's world. We can connect with hundreds of friends without seeing a single 3D face. It seems in matters of communication that we are not progressing in the right direction as a society, and I fear we will regret it. Have you ever been prompted to go visit someone and waited too long until they were gone and you were not able to? My parents are aging. I'm no spring chicken myself, so you can only imagine how old they must be. I need to make more of an effort to spend time with them before I no longer can here on earth. Let's look into our own lives to see what can be done to prevent this number one regret at the end of our sojourn. No one knows how long their life will actually be, or if there might be an abrupt departure for either ourselves or for any of our beloved ones. One of my husband's favorite musicals is entitled The Music Man. The leading character in the show is Professor Harold Hill, who's a charlatan band professor selling musical instruments to small-town folks before moving on. When he comes to his moment of redemption in the show, he shares some words of wisdom. Professor Hill realizes you pile up enough tomorrows, and you'll find you've collected a lot of empty yesterdays. Or in other words, don't exchange what matters most for what matters at the moment. Look at the much larger eternal picture. When I was a little girl, I was a worrier. I still am, but maybe to a lesser extent, or at least I like to tell myself that my fears are now more rational. When I was a preteen, I watched a movie on a film strip projector called The Mailbox. In it, an elderly woman who lives alone goes to her mailbox every day in hopes of finding a letter from her loved ones. One day, the long-awaited letter finally arrives, and she takes it to her home with excited reverence and sits in her rocking chair clutching the unopened envelope to her chest. There she gently passes away at home in a rocker, filled with happiness, never knowing the letter from her children was to inform her that they would be putting her into an assisted living facility. That short story haunted me. I never wanted any of my grandparents to feel that lonely. From that moment on, I wrote and mailed a handwritten letter to each of my grandparents monthly. I'm not sure I shared anything of value. The letters were filled with instances from my daily life and words from the heart. When I began the letter writing, I had 3 sets of living grandparents. This letter writing activity continued for over 30 years, since one of my grandmas lived to be 96 years old. I'm not sure if my words made any difference in their lives, but the effort to write them made a difference in mine. At each of their funerals, I felt so much love and a sense of peace knowing that they knew I loved them and cared about them. In the world of modern communications with instant access to information via free long-distance phone calls, emails, and texts, letter writing is not a necessity as it once was. In fact, in recent years, my news had already grown old before it arrived at my parents' and children's out-of-state homes, but the habit is still there. So now I send cards on holidays to my grandchildren who enjoy the thrill of getting old-school letters through snail mail. Small and simple, but hopefully making a difference one stamp at a time. Most of my life, I've not lived geographically close to extended family members, and my young grandchildren do not have cell phones. This is one way I can let them know that they are remembered and loved. When I depart to join my grandparents, hopefully this next generation will also remember that I cared. Challenge. This month, spend time with one person you love but usually do not see. Chapter 6. I wish I had lived up to my potential. The second most common deathbed regret given was, "I wish I had lived up to my potential." What is our potential? I doubt these people were lamenting that they had not climbed the ladder of success, perhaps that they had not become the person God intended them to be, or that they hoped to become. I pray every day that each of my children, who are on various paths along this journey, live to fulfill their missions here. One of the saddest things would be to find out after we died that we did not fulfill the task that we were sent here to accomplish, because I believe that each of us is sent here to make a difference in some small way. Why do we spend or devote so much of our time here to things that are meaningless or fleeting or inconsequential? We must do what we feel prompted to do and become what we are meant to be. Listen to the stirrings of your inner inspiration and to the sources outside ourselves. The more we devote ourselves to becoming a better person, and my husband would add, to giving service, the fewer regrets we will have. I'm not trying to send all of us on a guilt trip, but prevent them. The following story is a perfect example of how we miss opportunities along our paths. When I lived in Oregon, I taught an institute religion class to college students and young adults. At the end of each semester, the students were invited to come to my house to take their final test and then partake of a feast. It was a play on words. If they had spiritually feasted on the word with me during the term, they were invited to come to dinner to partake of a physical meal or feast at the completion. The year that we'd studied the New Testament, unbeknownst to the class, I set up a real-life test to see if they had really learned to follow Christ's example. I wondered if they'd internalized the words of Scripture that they had been reading and translated them into their own lives. If on the drive to my house they stopped to help any of those along their path, they'd receive a small slip of paper informing them that they had passed the test they'd come to take, and they did not need to take the written final. The first opportunity to serve was set up just outside my neighborhood on a rural country road. A couple supposedly in need were there with the hood of their car raised up to represent that their vehicle had broken down. The second mock situation was placed just inside the neighborhood, but I cannot remember at this point what the actual scenario was. Finally, they would come upon my youngest son, Keegan, covered in fake blood, ketchup, lying next to his bike down at the mouth of our cul-de-sac near our mailbox, having just experienced an apparent bike wreck. Any student who stopped would be given a ticket from one of these persons in distress, informing them that they had passed their final. Out of the approximately 20 students who came to take the final exam that night, only 2 or 3 paused to help any of the strangers in need. One was traveling with a friend and was not sure if they would have stopped on their own. And among those who did stop, all 3 only stopped to help young Keegan. Was I a terrible teacher? Or are we so focused on the destination that we miss the treasures for us along the way? We live more fully when we love others. We can become what we're meant to be and live up to our potentials when we're not lost in ourselves. Neil A. Maxwell coined the alliterated term divine discontent. He said that this innate sense that we can do and be something more sometimes creates within us divine discontent. This discontent comes when we compare where we are to what we have the power to become. It can be motivating or discouraging. I love the term, and I feel it can prevent us from settling below our divine potentials. C.S. Lewis's words add to this concept. He once said, "If we could recognize who we are, we would recognize we are walking with possible gods and goddesses, whom if we could see them in all their eternal dignity and glory, we would be tempted to fall down and worship." We mustn't sell ourselves short of the opportunities to be what we can be. In one of his speeches to his South African countrymen, the inspired Nelson Mandela quoted Marianne Williamson. He felt these people were living below their potentials and had much more to offer the world. With boldness, he told them, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same." Many people struggle with self-esteem and not feeling of value. Sometimes it may be because they do not see themselves as they really are, and other times because they've given up on becoming what they are meant to be. Every person born on this earth has something to offer the world. We may not outwardly appear to be royalty, but inside each of us is something divine bursting to come forth and shine. So from an unknown author, on those darkest days when you feel inadequate, unloved, and unworthy, remember whose son or daughter you are, and straighten your crown. Chapter 7. I wish I'd let myself be happier. Let. At the end of life, the number 3 regret stemmed from people finally realizing the ultimate secret they had missed or the mistake they had made, that they had more power over their own happiness than they supposed. They wished they had let themselves be happier. We have the ability within us to find our own joy. Happiness is largely a power of the mind generated from within. Abraham Lincoln understood this principle when he said, "People are as happy as they make up their mind to be." If it is that easy, why don't we just choose happiness? Do we think that pursuing the thing that brings us joy is selfish or irresponsible? Are we afraid we will lose our identity if we let go of the cynicism we carry? Is it more comfortable to be grumpy and complain about things around us than to make a change? Surprisingly, various studies made throughout the years confirm that external circumstances do not determine our happiness. The saying that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to it seems to be largely true. We can determine how happy we choose to be. From 1 to 10, how happy are you? A verse of scripture in 2 Nephi tells us men and women are that they might have joy. Do you believe that? A study done to determine what makes people happy found that 50% was genetic and 40% was learned behavior. This information is not used as a cop-out to rationalize that some of us are just not born to be happy. There are things we can do to increase our happiness. One simple thing with high happiness results was getting to know our neighbors. Taking time for 10 minutes of silence a day, prayer or meditation also help a person to be happy. Belonging to a group that meets once a month equals the happiness of doubling your income. It should be of no surprise that relationships make more difference than tangible items in determining how happy we are. However, money up to a certain amount each year does increase happiness. According to one research team, the figure was around $75,000 in 2010's economic value, enough to meet a family of 4's basic needs. In higher cost areas of living, like New York City or Hawaii, the basic amount needed was higher, and respectively the amount was lower in areas with a lower cost of living. After that amount, money did not seem to play a part in increasing happiness. Another study done in 1970 used a ratio of 1 to 5 to measure happiness, with 5 being the happiest. They surveyed a baseline control group whose happiness level registered at 3.8. Then they surveyed both lottery winners and paraplegics a few months after their life-changing events. Surprisingly, the results were not what one might imagine. The lottery winners registered an average of 3.3 on the happiness scale, and paraplegics were higher at 3.5. Happiness is not easy to estimate based off of life events. We have 4 daughters and 2 sons, all born to similar circumstances. However, each have had different trials, and each sees the world so very differently. Our youngest daughter has a special needs child, yet her motto is, "Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain." Rain will fall on all of us. There's no need to despair over it. The older we get, the more we look back and realize that external circumstances don't always matter and determine our happiness. There are a few exceptions for brief periods of time, but overall this is true. We can let ourselves be happy. Even when we do not feel happy, a smile can help us get there. Somehow just putting a smile on our face can trick our minds into feeling happier. The old adage, fake it till you make it, may have some truth. Maybe smiling helps us remember or imagine being happy, and our brain responds. The result of spreading a smile across our face often inspires others to return one as well, which in turn helps us to feel better about the world. An exercise instructor once pointed out that for some reason I seemed to have a smile plastered on my face throughout workout class. I did not even realize I was smiling. Perhaps my body knew I needed the extra positive energy to keep going. Physical activity itself can increase our feelings of well-being by sending endorphins into our bloodstream, which gives us a boost. Drug addicts don't get happiness from the drugs they take. They express it as finding relief. Endorphins actually fill our veins with a natural high that increases happiness. Turning to my German roots, I love the German word Wetzmeer. Loosely defined, it means a sadness that comes from brooding about how the world is inferior to how we think it should be. We can get caught up in this mindset and let things happen around us that affect what happens inside of us. The antidote, according to Dieter F. Uchtdorf, is to believe, love, and do. Have something faith-promoting that we can believe in, love those around us, and then proactively be the good in the world. Let's not just sit around being acted upon while bemoaning the circumstances outside our control. Insights from a former religious leader add to this thought. He used an acronym to teach us how we get joy, J-O-Y, which is a slightly different or perhaps elevated level of happiness. From focusing first on the J for Jesus, second turning to the O for others, and lastly the Y for you. There's something that happens when we look outside ourselves. It helps us dissipate our own struggles and see the world in a new light. As a young mother in December 1982, I read an article in the Women's Day magazine. Women's Day held a Christmas story competition that year and ran the submissions of the top 3 winners in this edition. One of my all-time favorite Christmas stories is a true story that received second place that year. It was called The Man Who Hated Christmas, and I was just going to summarize the story, but decided it's worth sharing in its entirety. It's just a small white envelope stuck among the branches of our Christmas tree. No name, no identification, no inscription. It has peeked through the branches of our tree for the past 10 years or so. It all began because my husband Mike hated Christmas. Oh, not the true meaning of Christmas, but the commercial aspects of it. Overspending. The frantic running around at the last minute to get a tie for Uncle Harry or the dusting powder for Grandma. The gifts given in desperation because you couldn't think of anything else. Knowing he felt this way, I decided one year to bypass the usual shirts, sweaters, ties, and so forth. I reached for something special for Mike. The inspiration came in an unusual way. Our son Kevin, who was 12 that year, was wrestling at the junior level at the school he attended, and shortly before Christmas, there was a non-league match against a team sponsored by an inner-city church. These youngsters, dressed in sneakers so ragged the shoestrings seemed to be the only thing holding them together, presented a sharp contrast to our boys in their spiffy blue and gold uniforms and sparkling new wrestling shoes. As the match began, I was alarmed to see that the other team was wrestling without headgear, a kind of light helmet designed to protect the wrestlers' ears. It was a luxury that the ragtag team obviously could not afford. Well, we ended up walloping them. We took every weight class, and each of their boys got up from the mat. He swaggered around in these tatters with false bravado, a kind of street pride that couldn't acknowledge defeat. Mike, seated beside me, shook his head sadly. I wish just one of them could have won, he said. They have a lot of potential, but losing like this could take the heart right out of them. Mike loved kids, all kids, and he knew them, having coached Little League football, baseball, and lacrosse. That's when the idea for his present came. That afternoon, I went to a local sporting goods store and bought an assortment of wrestling headgear and shoes and sent them anonymously to the inner-city church. On Christmas Eve, I placed the envelope on the tree, the note inside telling Mike what I had done and that this was his gift for me. His smile was the brightest thing about Christmas that year and in the succeeding years. For each Christmas, I followed the tradition. One year sending a group of mentally handicapped youngsters to a hockey game, another year a check to a pair of elderly brothers whose home had burned to the ground the week before Christmas, and on and on. The envelope became the highlight of our Christmas. It was always the last thing opened on Christmas morning, and our children, ignoring their new toys, would stand with wide-eyed anticipation as our dad lifted the envelope from the tree to reveal its contents. As the children grew, the toys gave way to more practical presents, but the envelope never lost its allure. The story doesn't end here. You see, we lost Mike last year due to the dreaded cancer. When Christmas rolled around, I was still so wrapped up in grief that I barely got up the tree. But Christmas Eve found me placing an envelope on the tree, and in the morning it was joined by 3 others. Each of our children, unbeknownst to the others, had placed an envelope on the tree for their dad. The tradition has grown, and someday will expand even further with our grandchildren standing to take down the envelope. Mike's spirit, like the Christmas spirit, will always be with us. This story touches my heart every time I read the message. I love how Mike's feelings about Christmas changed. Christmas didn't change, but Mike's heart did. He captured the true spirit of the season in focusing on the O, or others, and by doing that inadvertently focused on the J, or what Jesus would have us do. Christ gave the ultimate gift as an example. Happiness is usually there. It may just be hiding behind things that do not really matter. We must let ourselves be happy, often by simply looking in the opposite direction and not into the mirror. Chapter 8. Inoculating Against the Suicide Epidemic. This is a sensitive subject. I cannot imagine anything more awful than losing a family member whose life was taken by his own hands. I hesitate to even attempt to address the topic. But suicide has increased by such large percentages in the last few years that we cannot hide it in the closet. Death by suicide numbers are especially high in the teenage and young adult categories and would be 20 times higher if every attempt was counted. Every time I read an account of someone taking their own life, my heart breaks for both the victim and their family. An article written after some seemingly senseless political suicides in June 2018 by the blogger Matt Walsh made sense to me. The author did not believe that they had to do mainly with mental illness. Of course, the fact is that mental health definitely plays a part in the suicide crisis, but there has to be more to the story. Mr. Walsh proposed, "People will say that suicide is on the rise because we're not doing enough to fight the mental health crisis. But this can't be the cause. We have never been more aware of or more proactive against mental health issues, yet the suicide rate only continues to climb. The rate was a fraction of what it is today back when nobody had even heard of mental health." Purely psychological explanations just don't hold up. Clearly, there has to be a deeper problem here. He had me captured with the first paragraph. The world is clamoring to understand the cause of this sad phenomenon. I will not share the whole article on the topic, but have included a few more paragraphs that I find especially insightful on this subject. Mr. Walsh continues, I think that the problem is emptiness. There's an emptiness at the core of our culture, and from this root the suicide epidemic grows. We have fled from God, from meaning, from purpose, and embrace a soft kind of nihilism, a nihilism that will not call itself nihilism. It uses other words and slogans to describe itself. You only live once, it says, or live your truth. People are told that there is only one life, one reality, and it has no meaning aside from that which you assign to it. But what happens when you no longer see meaning? Well, our culture says, if you do not see it, then it is not there. Those who seek happiness by following the well-worn paths will inevitably fall into this pit. If you do what everyone else is doing and live how they live and walk in their footsteps, you will end up in the same darkness. You will begin to feel that there is no hope and no point and no real beauty or joy to be found in life. And this is the state in which so many of us are living. A great many people in America are wallowing in this nihilistic despair and living hollow lives devoid of substance. They struggle and flail and reach out for help, but so often the hand that grabs hold of them will only drag them deeper into the pit. I think it is because the disorder is not purely psychological. It goes beyond our brains and into our souls, into the emptiness. What everyone really craves deep in their bones is truth and meaning. Not meaning they arbitrarily assign, but meaning that is objective and inherent and beyond our ability to remove or change. But our culture tells us that nothing of the sort exists. There is only this physical world and our egos and whatever else we decide to make of it. And if we make nothing of it and find nothing in it, then life is nothing and there's no reason to carry on living anymore. They need hope. They need meaning. They need there to be a point to all of this, a reason. There is a transcendent spiritual character to humanity, and we all innately recognize it. We find despair when we reject it and try to separate ourselves from it and from ourselves. Hope is found the other way, in the opposite direction. Hope is found when we embrace who we are as children of God, and we keep our eyes and hearts focused on eternity, on home. God wants us there with Him, but not yet. There is still more to be done and more life to be lived, and we can live it in joy, knowing that there is meaning and point to all of this. I have pondered on these words, and I tend to agree. Some suicides may occur from not well thought through, maybe even accidental acts, when the perpetrator is at a very low point and not acting within their full range of capacity. But the truth is that we have never, in the time of this world, been more aware of mental illness and dealing with it. There's an emptiness that people cannot fill. I believe that emptiness has much to do with not understanding our purpose here and not knowing the Heavenly Father who is absent in our lives. If we get closer to our God, in whatever way works best for each individual, He can help fill that emptiness, thus increasing happiness. My Grandma June lost the use of her arms when she was in her 50s, around the time I was born. The doctors were not sure if the loss of mobility was caused by a polio-like virus or a fall on her icy porch. For a capable, self-sufficient woman, the loss was devastating. She could no longer do most of her former tasks, and a darkness enveloped her. Thoughts of taking her life filled her mind regularly. She knew in her heart that suicide was not the best solution, but she did not want to be a burden on her family. Dark thoughts persisted. Grandma was shown in her mind exactly how she could accomplish the deed. She struggled. She prayed fervently to control her thoughts and not let her thoughts control her. She began to understand how this act would hurt instead of help those she loved. Only spending hours on her knees in prayer pulled her from the dark abyss. My grandmother went on to live a meaningful life and accomplish many things without the use of her arms. She figured out ways to garden, preserve food, bake cookies, and even painted pictures with a brush in her mouth. At one point, she was discovered unconscious on her living room floor where she had encountered a near-death experience. When she came back around, she said she was told that she could not stay on the other side yet, but that she still had 3 things to accomplish. Unfortunately, she could not remember what those 3 things were. My Grandma June lived to be 96 years old and was an example to many of being able to do hard things. She was the most inspirational figure in my life. I am blessed that she didn't go through with her dark thoughts. The problem is evident in other less dramatic manifestations also increasing in today's society. Anxiety and panic attacks have increased exponentially, with 40 million people suffering from the malady in the U.S., 1 in 5 people, and 300 million worldwide. Symptoms of anxiety, which most of us have likely experienced at one time or another, include restlessness, a feeling of being on edge, uncontrollable feelings of worry, increased irritability, concentration difficulties, and sleep difficulties such as problems in falling or staying asleep. I discovered an article in Medical News Today about how anxiety is snowballing in the United States and prevalent in the western part of the world. It also stated that a study found that those who were more affluent had a higher level of anxiety. Also, people who pursued money, looks, and status were more likely to feel anxious and depressed. The American Psychiatric Association ran a poll on 1,000 U.S. residents in 2017, and they found that nearly 2/3 were extremely or somewhat anxious about health and safety for themselves and their families, and more than 1/3 were more anxious overall than last year. They also noted that millennials were the most anxious generation. In 2018, the same poll was repeated. Anxiety was shown to have risen again by another 5%. We as a people are not at peace. Inner peace has become elusive. With all the unsettling events in the world today, we are not sure where to turn or what to do for ourselves and our families. Avoiding the news for periods of time may help, but we cannot bury our heads in the sand. We have discussed that we are happier when we assist others or engage with those around us, and not when we are avoiding them by isolating ourselves. I went on a treasure hunt looking for verses in the scriptures that might unlock a secret to happiness, and made a list of any that mentioned happiness or joy. It was a meaningful activity for a Sunday afternoon. One of my favorites was in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, section 11, verse 13. I will impart unto you of my Spirit, which shall enlighten your mind, which shall fill your soul with joy. Within those words is a huge key to feeling peace and holding on to happiness. The secret may lay in having or seeking God's Spirit to be with us. Perhaps striving to have His Spirit with us as we travel dark days can help fill our emptiness and further inoculate us from the suicide epidemic. Suicide Prevention Hotline number 1-800-273-8255. Chapter 9. Finding Joy in the Journey. Think of the last time you were really happy and bursting with joy. I would guess it had something to do with relationships and not with inanimate objects. Maybe you felt extreme love or were serving someone in need. In these situations, we do not only have human connection, but are hanging out with deity spiritually as well. Knowing and doing good or assisting in the work of God brings us joy. The word gospel means good news. Even though I would guess every person reading this book has had difficult struggles in their life, those who know and follow truth should be the happiest people on the planet. We know the source of where true happiness lies. I pray that we will not wait until we are ready to die before we truly learn to live well. As a registered nurse in one of my former careers, I worked on call on the medical surgical floor at St. Charles Medical Center in Bend, Oregon. One of my fears was that a patient I was tending would die while in my care. It was bound to happen, but when it did, it was not at all what I expected. On an evening shift in 1995, I'd been assigned several patients, 2 of which I remember well. One was a woman around 60 years old who had been admitted through the emergency room the night before and was not doing well. The other woman was over a decade younger, but she looked years older than the first. Patient number 2 had fallen off her commode in an inebriated state and split her head open on the bathroom floor or counter on the way down. The injury was stapled shut, making her have a Frankensteinish appearance. She kept trying to sneak a cigarette even though she was on oxygen, which, if she succeeded lighting, could have blown us both to smithereens. During the shift, patient number 1 unexpectedly passed away, due to no fault of her nurse, may I add. The awful part was that our children kept arriving to visit her, and I had to be the bearer of bad and sad news that she was gone. What I never would have guessed was that the death itself, although extremely painful for the family, was not awful to attend to as a caregiver. The room with my deceased patient was far less scary than the one with my living bride of Frankenstein trying to still a smoke. I requested that the family of the woman who had died leave the room for a few moments so I could take out her IV and other medical tubes to prepare her for the mortician's arrival. The spirit in the room, filled with recent death, was difficult to describe. Maybe comforting is the closest I can get. I felt profound peace and stillness there. I will never be afraid of death again. It can be a beautiful, peaceful passage. I would guess my deceased patient had lived her life well. The sacred space around her felt as if loved ones had come to take her home. I was in no hurry to leave, but bask in the experience. Hopefully we can each have such a tranquil demise. We don't want to live like Emily in our town when we pass and feel like we have not really lived or enjoyed the wonders and relationships of earth life while here. Children teach us how to find joy in every moment, even under the most challenging circumstances. Young ones haven't yet learned to be depressed by concentrating on things they don't have. They find joy in what is available around them. I can picture each of my grandchildren with a smile on their faces. They do not need the fanciest toys or a trip to Disneyland to be happy. During their visits, whatever we do brings them joy. My 5th grandchild is named Cash. He was born with a severe case of spinal bifida and was paralyzed from the waist down with legs that were folded over his head and knees that bent backward. Cash spent the first few weeks of his life in the NICU at the Primary Children's Hospital. My daughter and her husband feared for what kind of life their little boy could hope for when he could not even lie on his stomach due to his malformed legs that kept his body in a tent-like position. While the world may look on this young man as limited, Cash has never seen himself that way, and he finds joy in his journey here every day. His smile is pure magic, and by the age of 4 he was a pro in the wheelchair maneuvering. He can ride horses, has participated in gymnastics, coached football, loves wheelchair basketball, and has even become proficient on arm crutches at 8 years old. A skill the doctors and his parents did not know if he would ever be able to master. I've never seen him feel sorry for himself or seek exceptions. In 1st grade, each student in his class was expected to take their turn at cleaning the classroom. Cash had an assignment to take out the trash on the next rotation. To prepare, he came home from school and asked his mother if they could go back to the school after the others had gone home so he could figure out how he could accomplish the task in his wheelchair. He never has a why me attitude. Instead, he sports a how can I do this mentality. Whenever other kids have treated him less than kind, or when he has been left out of activities, his mother will ask Cash if it makes him feel sad or mad. Cash's answer is always, no, they are my friends. He has taught much to our whole family. We do not have to have perfect circumstances to find joy in our journey. Joy can be found all around. The opposite of happiness could be considered depression. Depression is sometimes called the common cold of mental illness since so many people have suffered from it at some point in their lives. The National Institutes of Health determined that 16 million people reported at least one major episode of depression in 2014, which is about 7% of the adult population. If milder symptoms or shorter durations were included, these numbers would go even higher. While those afflicted with severe depression can often benefit from speaking with a therapist or taking medication, like the common cold, mildly depressed feelings often go away on their own. Peaks and valleys of emotions are a common process of the human psyche. At times we may need to endure the experience or merely ride our lower points until we can pedal up the hill again. Much of our journey here is not merely physical, but also mental and spiritual. Unlocking our creativity can help us enjoy life on a higher level. Developing our latent talents can sharpen our capacity to reason, to act, and to find greater purpose in life. These efforts can even dispel loneliness and heartache. They give a renewal, a spark of enthusiasm, and a zest for life. My life has had many twists and turns. I didn't start writing until later in life when I moved to a fairly isolated area, minus all my children, former friends, and too far from former jobs to keep performing them. Writing truly filled my days with joy and made me feel alive. Joy is waiting to be found in unlikely places. Gratitude is another important aspect of happiness that I would be amiss not to mention. Gratitude calls attention to the good things in our lives. An excellent exercise is to think of something we are grateful for and then try to thank the person most responsible. I was once given a gratitude journal. Any blank page book will do, but official gratitude journals are available on retail sites these days. My goal was to write at least 3 things at the end of each day that I was grateful for. At first, it was difficult. I was obviously not in the habit of looking for all the good that daily filled my life. But as the days went on, it became easier and easier to see all of my blessings. 3 things to be grateful for each day eventually did not seem like nearly enough. Developing an attitude of gratitude definitely created an aura of happiness. According to psychology professor Roger Emmons, author of Thanks, How the New Science of Gratitude Can Make You Happier, gratitude magnifies positive emotions, blocks toxic emotions, cultivates stress resistance, and leads to a higher sense of self-worth. He studied more than 1,000 people from ages 8 to 80, and he found that people who practice gratitude consistently report a host of benefits. Under physical, stronger immune systems, less bothered by aches and pains, lower blood pressure, exercise more and take better care of their health, sleep longer, and feel more refreshed upon waking. Psychological, higher levels of positive emotions, more alert and alive and awake, more joy and pleasure, and more optimism and happiness. Social, more helpful and generous and compassionate, more forgiving, more outgoing, and feel less lonely and isolated. The power of gratitude is timeless. We glean from the New Testament that gratitude and obedience are the way we show our love to God. In the book of Luke is a story about 10 lepers. Leprosy is a wasting away disease that devoured skin and tissue in Christ's day. It's still around today, but it's curable. The people were cast from society and condemned to a life of isolation. It would be difficult to achieve happiness under these dire circumstances. In Luke, when the lepers recognized Jesus, who was rumored to be a healer, they asked him to have mercy on them. As the 10 men followed Christ's instructions to go see a priest, they were all 10 cleansed along the way. Yet only one of them returned to give thanks. The account says that the man fell down on his, the leper's, face at his, Christ's, feet, giving him thanks. And Jesus answered, said, "Were not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Even then, gratitude was an uncommon act, it appears. Christ responded by blessing the leper with even more than physical healing. He said unto him, "Arise and go thy way, thy faith has made thee whole." The word whole translates from the Hebrew language to perfect or complete. The diseased man was not only physically healed, but his spirit as well. All of the impurity, pain, and injustice was washed away. Gratitude is healing to our souls, and that healing brings deep and abiding happiness. The ancient Roman philosopher Horace admonished, "Whatever hour God has blessed you with, take it with grateful hand, nor postpone your joys from year to year, so that in whatever place you have been, you may say that you lived happily." Chapter 10, Hijacking Happiness, Conclusion. Hijacking definition. 1. To unlawfully seize an aircraft, ship, or vehicle in transit and force it to go to a different destination or use it for one's own purpose. 2. Steal goods by seizing them in transit. 3. Take over something and use it for different purposes. Originated in 1920 in the U.S. Happiness definition. 1. A state of well-being and contentment or joy. 2. A pleasurable or satisfying experience, i.e., when people are successful or safe or lucky, they feel happiness. 3. The pursuit of happiness is something this country is based on, but different people feel happy for different reasons. Apparently, it's hard for anyone to define happiness if the dictionary lists it as being lucky. Happiness is more about loving who you are and where you are in life. No outside source can give you true happiness. Aristotle's definition of happiness was, "Happiness depends on ourselves." More than most philosophers, Aristotle enshrined happiness as a central purpose of human life and a goal in itself. He devoted more space on the topic of happiness than any other thinker prior to the modern era. Aristotle was convinced that a genuinely happy life required the fulfillment of a broad range of conditions, including physical as well as mental well-being, and that this virtue was achieved by maintaining balance. Over 2,300 years later, wise men and women are still trying to decipher what happiness is and how to achieve it. Have you ever taken off on a journey, any kind of journey, and not ended up where you expected? I think this happens to most of us much of the time, just not necessarily on an airplane going to a predetermined place. We often think of hijacking in today's world as a violent act, taking a group or to a destination that they did not choose or sign up for. I'm tweaking that definition. My hijacking is of a gentler nature. My vision is to board the vehicle of happiness, whatever that may be for you, and gently guide it to where you want to go. Don't let it take off and leave you behind, or get into one of the lesser aircrafts of discouragement or frustration. There's enough happiness to go around and room for everyone to be on board or to have their own seat. Let's all hijack some happiness and not let it float past without us. God reminds us over and over in the scriptures to be of good cheer, do not fear, and to fear not, little flock. Where in contrast, swirling all around us are reasons we can find to fear and not just jump aboard a vehicle of happiness. The world in these times can be a frightening place, but we can live amidst it and yet on our own island of peace and happiness. When I was 24 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was expecting my 3rd child at the time, and my greatest fear was what would happen to this baby and to the 2 little girls I'd already been blessed with. No one could love them as much as I did, and I longed to be there to protect them through the tough times they would encounter in their days ahead. In anguish, I knelt beside our king-sized waterbed and pled with the Father above to allow me to raise these girls to adulthood. As my prayers were turned heavenward, the words to a song filled my mind. It turned out to be the 3rd verse of How Firm a Foundation. Fear not, I am with thee. O be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. Immediately peace filled my heart, and I knew that things would be okay. I did not know what okay looked like under these circumstances, but I trusted it was in heaven's hands. This verse of song came to my mind frequently throughout the next few decades to comfort me through difficult times and to remind me to trust and remember that I was not in charge. In more recent years, a new verse of the same song has replaced verse number 3 when I need extra support. Now the 7th verse of How Firm a Foundation comes to me when I feel discouraged or need help. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not, I cannot desert to his foes. The soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never, no never forsake. For the record, our foes do not have to be a physical enemy in human form. They can be any enemy taking any shape, mental or otherwise, that keeps us from feeling peace and happiness. Any and all are welcome to borrow this verse at any time. It is pretty great and really not mine to hoard. Just like there's plenty of room aboard the vehicle to happiness, there are many things we can share with one another on this journey to increase happiness. Human beings need connection. Experiments were performed on infants isolated in an orphanage who were denied human contact. Most died. When we save another soul, we often save ourselves in the process. Be a distributor of happiness in a world hungry for it. It's a win-win for all involved. Scientifically, the left frontal lobe of the brain shows an increase in activity when happy. Happy brains are smarter and increase our body's immune to disease. I'm not good at last words, perhaps because I always think of something else I wish I had said. This short and simple compilation on the topic of happiness is in no way considered to be definitive. I realize there's much, much more that could, should, and probably will be said on the subject. However, to truly define, understand, and acquire happiness will take the work of a lifetime for each of us individually. It will be an easier task for some than others, but definitely worth all efforts made by any who attempt the goal. May we all be inspired and edified as we continue Earth's adventures by hijacking some extra happiness along the way. This has been Hijacking Happiness by Teresa Meyerhofer Christensen. Narrated by Teresa Meyerhofer Christensen. Copyright 2019.